Welcome back, or welcome to the afternoon shift on WBEZ with me, Rick Kogan. Front page story in the Tribune today. How much time, fuel do commuters waste? In studio with me is a nice young man originally from Alabama named Jesse Elam, who has the job of senior planner at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. He's a project manager on the Congestion pricing campaign. And on the phone, Dwight Hennessy, assistant professor of traffic psychology at Buffalo State College. How do you get a job like that, Mr. Hennessy?
I'm still trying to figure that out myself.
What does that mean? I have to assume, and Jesse Elam, jump in on this anytime you feel like it, that traffic can be psychologically, I'm going to just make a leap and say that traffic and traffic congestion can be psychologically damaging to a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot what drives much of what traffic psychology as a discipline does. It's the realization that traffic really is an environment that's important to everyday life. And just like we would study the effects of things that happen in a workplace or things that happen in a home that influence us, there's this void that I think for a long time was just lacking, that we got to get to work somehow, we got to get back home somehow, and there's an incredible amount of carryover between these environments, that what happens in traffic influences what happens at work and at home, and vice versa.
Jesse, you obviously agree with that, don't you?
Well, I have to agree that there's a psychological dimension to being in traffic. There's no question about that. From a public agency standpoint, from CMAP standpoint, we're really looking at this as a quality of life issue. Everybody can relate to this. Nobody wants to be stuck in traffic. And we're also looking at it from an economic efficiency standpoint. The more time we spend in traffic is time that we're not spending getting to work or delivering goods. So those are really the two things that we're looking at.
Professor Hennessy, I have to believe that stress is one of your main topics in the traffic psychology biz.
Yeah, that's what originally drew me to this particular discipline, because I'm obviously not that common in North America to hear about people specializing in traffic. You see it more in Europe and Australia, but there's a lot of people who travel from point A to point B in this country, and there are a lot of things that are a source of stress in this environment, and once we started looking at this, just really captivated by how much of a toll it really does have on our day-to-day well-being.
I think it always, you always hear these instances of road rage, and I think that's when that is not at all, I think, what you're talking about. It's a much more subtle kind of problem, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. And we have looked over the years at the aggression and anger and the emotion and stuff like that are part of it. But the more we look at this, the more we realize that at the heart or the root of even those issues is the stress that we experience. And more often than not, people don't even realize they themselves are feeling this.
What can someone do if they know, get in a car and they say, I know it's going to take 45 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes, and I'll talk to Jesse Elam about those variables in a moment. Is there anything people can do to manage better?
Well,
short of having a yogi master in your car next to you.
Well, if you're asking, can people do things to help minimize that stress? Absolutely. I think just naturally we all engage in some kind of process to try to deal with the stress in all areas of our life, and I have heard some outrageous things over the years that people do to try to deal with,
for instance,
a variety of traffic issues. Not that long ago, I live outside of Buffalo on the Canadian suburb, I call it, of Buffalo, and there was a big issue for a while, maybe about a year and a half ago, where people were concerned with people doing things. There's rural communities where they would turn their trucks off to roll down hills to save gas. So, there is an economic cost to driving, and saving money is one way people have tried to deal with things like that by hypermiling. People will do things in the car that we all know is relatively unsafe in some ways, like talking on the phone to people. There are some healthy alternatives. I mean, we've looked at things like listening to music, but even then there's limits to that. If you're listening to music that's not your preferred style of music, there's actually an opposite effect.
Wow, unbelievable. Jesse Elam's going to talk momentarily when I let you go back to your Canadian suburb of Buffalo. I love that notion. What's your commute every day, Professor?
On a good day, it takes me 10 minutes door to door.
Oh, you're dry. People here are just people in Chicago are hating you now. But
to be fair to the fine folks in Chicago,
yeah,
and I love Chicago. I lived in Toronto for a decade, and Toronto driving and Chicago driving are very similar. We have the same kinds of issues that what takes you 10 minutes one day in Toronto, the very next day could take you 2 hours.
Yeah, it's the unpredictability of it that is the gist of this piece on the front page of the Tribune today. Give people right now stuck in traffic somewhere in Chicago something that can get them through the next hour. Dwight Hennessy, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening, and this is free advice from Dwight Hennessy, the assistant professor of traffic psychology at Buffalo State College. Do not get stressed. What should they do?
Well, I'm hoping right now this is going a long way to helping them. I honestly, I really do think talk radio in many ways is better than music.
Well, you should hear some of the other talk radio shows in Chicago. You'd blow your brains out.
Well, I mean specifically this talk radio.
Well, yes, of course you do, Professor. Yes.
That goes without saying.
Yes, of course you do.
But, you pointed to unpredictability, because that really is, for a lot of people, the big issue. Unpredictability is what causes a lot of our stress. Because and it doesn't matter whether it's a big city like Chicago or even a smaller city like Buffalo or even a small town. If you expect to drive this long and it takes you twice as long, or 10 minutes or 15, whatever, much longer, that's what really stirs the arousal. Some of it's physical, some of it's mental, because things aren't going the way we would like them to go.
Yeah.
And we find that the people who have the least amount of trouble with that are the ones who, on one hand, are the people who can learn to let it go and relax, because time urgency really exaggerates this. So planning ahead, giving yourself extra time, these are the people who can kind of breathe and let it go. The other people are the ones who, at the very least, even if they can't control, look for something to help them control, like looking for alternate routes, or sometimes even just having somebody in a vehicle to talk to about planning and strategy.
Dwight Hennessy is the assistant professor of traffic psychology at Buffalo State College, where I, a 17-year-old ready to go to college, you've been inspiring enough to make me a budding traffic psychologist. I can't thank you enough for joining us on the afternoon shift.
My pleasure.
Thanks. He was interesting, was he not?
He was.
Jesse Elam, he makes sense, does he not?
Yeah, and I'll just say, some of that stress that Professor Hennessy was referring to, we think we can eliminate some of that stress by just eliminating some of the congestion.
Well, that's part of what your job, and your job, it's a long time. You're a project manager on the congestion pricing campaign. What does that mean?
Well, I'll tell you, in a nutshell, our basic idea is to give people better options for getting around, give drivers better options for getting around by building express toll lanes. So these express toll lanes, people can get into them and pay a modest charge and thereby bypass traffic jams.
How effective would that be? I mean, don't you need, and you have to be in your job with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, you have to kind of be a futurist here. You have to, in your mind, when you're stuck on the Kennedy or something, be envisioning roads and expressways of the future. What do you see?
Well, sure. I mean, you have to be a futurist to some extent, but we're talking about practical strategies that you could put into place real soon. I mean, one of the projects that we're studying it's already beginning construction this year, could ideally be open as of 2016. So this is stuff that's actually very close.
Does it not disenfranchise the people who have no money, who are pinched by gas prices, who are pinched by the economy?
It does not. It's not going to make, because we're talking about actually building some new lanes and in select cases building some new roads and then pricing those that new capacity, those new lanes. So it's not going to make anyone worse off. So everyone, and everyone could take advantage of these lanes. Really, the cost that we calculated in our modeling is pretty modest.
How bad is it here? In this new study just released, Urban Mobility Report released Tuesday by Texas A&M Transportation Institute, Chicago ranks as the 7th worst commuting city.
Yeah, this is not the only report on congestion out there. It's an important one. It's one that people look at all over the place. By other reports, we are the third most or the first most congested place in the nation. But I think this report really does call attention to some basic facts, which is that since they've been counting since, I think, 82, congestion per person or measured as delay per individual commuter has more than doubled.
Why is that?
Well, there are more people on the road, and there are, I'll just say that the number of miles that people travel, the number of drivers is increasing a lot faster than the mileage of roads.
Is this a problem of public transportation, talking about people being visionary at some point? Should mass transit and the people running mass transit 20 years ago, should they have foreseen this and been a little more visionary in their approach?
Well, Chicago's done some visionary things with public transit. I mean, for instance, putting the Blue Line and the median of the Kennedy Expressway, that had never been done. Chicago pioneered that. So there's a lot of forward-thinking things that have been done in the Chicago area. And I want to go back to our plan here. The congestion pricing proposal that we make is not the only thing. Transit is a big part of how we should be getting around in the future. We call for doubling transit ridership by 2040.
How do you do that?
You would do that by modernizing the transit system, by making it easier and more pleasant to use, faster, better service, all those things together.
And as the urban sprawl continues, when we think of, 20 years from now, Milwaukee and Chicago will be sort of combined, you think in that manner too, right? High-speed rail, any part of this at all?
Yeah, high-speed rail is certainly something that we contemplate in our planning efforts.
Where do you live?
I live in Logan Square in Chicago.
So how long does it take you to get to work?
It takes me about 40 minutes door to door.
Do you drive?
I do not. I take the Blue Line.
And you recommend that for anybody, right?
The more people on the train, it's more congested. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you can't work your iPhone well enough. How long have you been doing this job, Jesse Elam, as senior planner?
Coming up on 8 years.
8 years?
Yeah.
Give me a rough gauge about, there is financial stress, there's emotional stress, and is it mostly the unpredictability of it? Now, there used to be, you're a young man, I'm speaking to people of my generation, there were rush hours, and then there were non-rush hours, and you could from downtown get to O'Hare in 30 minutes in a non-rush hour if there wasn't an accident. What about that?
No, I think you're right. I mean, the overall level of traffic is much higher than it used to be. It used to be that you'd have what they call a peak distribution, what's very high in the morning and very high in the afternoon, and then normal or much lower in the middle of the day. It's high all the time now. It's still peaked, in the afternoon and
sure.
in the morning, but it's high all the time.
So you would recommend getting a job maybe that started at 3 a.m. in the morning if you had to commute.
If you could get a job as an overnight radio host, maybe.
Yeah. One of the things that confounds me is yes, there are more people here, there are more cars. The number of cars on the road is stunning to me. Is it that many more than there were 10 years ago? Yes. I mean, there's certainly more cars on the road. There's no question about that, and people are driving more than they did 10 years ago. Now, I will say that because of the recession, we have had a leveling off, and maybe in some places even a slight decline in the amount of driving. But overall, we don't think that's gonna hold. We think once we get back to normal, we'll be driving just as much as ever. And it'll be worse than ever. Tell me, before I let you go, Jesse Elam, who's a project manager in congestion pricing policy for the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, these new toll express kind of lanes that are going to be set up, would they be set up as one of the lanes on an existing expressway, for instance, or
Well, the way we studied it, it would be an added lane to an existing expressway, and that lane would be separated probably by plastic pylons or just striping, and then you would have access points every couple of miles and a little message sign that would tell you how much it would cost to pop into that lane. So as you're driving up to it, you could make a choice. Is this an urgent trip or not? If it is, then pop in and pay the $1.50, $2, whatever it's going to be.
How do you build those lanes?
It's normal engineering techniques.
I mean, you would have to construct new lanes.
That's right, yes.
On existing expressways.
Yeah.
Let's listen before we leave. Jesse Elam, you're going to be back in here. There's no question about it, because this whole thing totally intrigues me. Jesse is a senior planner at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. He's a project manager of the Congestion Pricing Campaign, which I guess will eventually make your lives easier. I want to thank Eiley Heikkinen-Weiss and Katie O'Brien for putting this segment together. And as we go out, here, Jesse, listen to this too. Brought to you by WBEZ's Scott Kanowski. Here are the voices of some people in downtown Chicago.
Yeah, I find it very unpredictable. You kind of get used to it, and it becomes a part of the pattern of how you drive.
A lot of traffic, a lot of accidents, a whole lot going on.
Getting downtown here, sometimes it's crowded and sometimes it's not. So, you never know how to plan for it.
I don't plan. You're never supposed to plan, not for Chicago.
It's definitely frustrating.
You don't come down to the city to relax. You come for the excitement.
I used to live in Chicago. I don't now, but I can get to Chicago from Cincinnati faster than I can get downtown when I lived here. So
it's a city. That's what you expect. That's what the city's about.